Hello, this is Steven now, and we are back here with Batman 66, and today we'll be reviewing the animated movie Batman Return of the Caped Crusader. So before we get into the actual film, let's explain a bit. Well, first off, it's been a long time since I've done anything Batman 66 related, so it's nice to get back into one of my favorite series I did on the channel. Now, for those who don't know or unaware of this film, let's get a bit of backstory of how this film came to be. Well, first off, we need to start at the end of the original series, which ran from 1966 to 1968, had 3 seasons, over 120-something episodes, and a theatrical released live-action movie. Now, even though the show was popular in the 60s and was always on the reruns in the 70s, it did kind of damage the reputation of Batman for quite a while, in a way, as this was the interpretation for a while many people always thought of Batman. And at this time in the comics, in both the 70s and 80s, we're in the Bronze Age, and Batman was returning back to his more dark and gothic roots. Eventually, in 1989, Tim Burton released his first live-action Batman film, named Batman, one of the biggest box office hits of that year, and really showed how serious superhero films can be taken. As a result of that, throughout the 90s, Batman was returning more to this dark and even gothic roots, and as a result, this interpretation didn't hurt the Batman brand anymore. And as a result, the show kind of began a really huge following, despite not being arguably the Dark Knight people think. It instead is called the Bright Knight, and people have come to enjoy this interpretation because it's rather different. Now, somewhere in the 2000s, I think some point after 2012, I think, somewhere after that, there was always rumors of talk of the show possibly coming back. In fact, in 2014, they released on Blu-ray the original series, as the series was really in reruns and was rarely a part of any DVD releases, and it took a long time for that to happen. Eventually, fans would be surprised when it was announced that there would be essentially this animated movie based off the original, of the original 66 series. As a result, and what makes it even better is, by this point only 3 of the old school cast remained. First off, there was Adam West and Burt Ward, who would return to reprise their roles in voice acting roles for the film. They also brought Julie Newmar, arguably everyone's favorite interpretation of Catwoman, along for the ride to return to voice Catwoman. With that title, this was said to be a love letter to the series, and in 2016 it was released. So the question remains, how do I personally feel about this film? Does it live up to the expectations of the original series, or is it something that you as a fan should skip? Well, before we actually get my final thoughts, let's get into the full plot. Now, I'm going to go full in depth on this plot, so I recommend watch the film, come back to this point, and then we'll hear my final thoughts. We begin the movie at this Gotham TV show, Gotham Palace, and whilst that's happening, we see Bruce and Dick, still voiced by Adam West and Burt Ward, doing the typical shenanigans that they would used to do on the original show, in corny and cheek, tongue and all. Now, despite how old Adam West is, you can hear in his voice, I absolutely loved that he was able to come back. But I will admit, Burt Ward's voice sounds like it hasn't aged a day, and I found that very interesting. After that, they tune in to watch the Gotham City Palace show. Whilst that's happening, the show comes under attack by 4 of the series' greatest villains: the Joker, the Riddler, Catwoman, and the Penguin. Also must note that there was an opening way before the movie actually started, with nice little tongue-in-cheek references to the original comics, and I like how all the characters were introduced, both in the style and how they were in their first comic appearance, mostly with covers, so I liked that. Again, I kind of skipped, but I feel I need to mention it. Also should be noted is that the voice cast, other than Julie Newmar returning as Catwoman, the rest of the cast were voiced by completely different people because most of the original cast have passed away. With seeing this, we get the usual phone call from Police Commissioner Gordon, slide down the back poles, into the Batmobile and driving off, all to the updated version of the 66 theme song. It feels like we're back with old times, and it feels like we are really in for something really special. So automatically, I'm already hooked. It feels like we're turning to the series. And honestly, I like the idea of animation form as it still retains heavily in the 60s, which I liked. Eventually, Batman and Robin make their way to Police Commissioner Gordon's office, and of course, it's revealed that the Riddler has once again left one of his trademark clues. Batman manages to deduce it, and it points to one of the old Gotham research lab, where they are testing out a new invention. I like how the leaps of logic they jump to get to the answer. It feels like we're so back in 66. Eventually, this would lead to the villains and their henchmen at the lab trying to stealing this new duplicator ray. But Batman and Robin show up and we get a bat fight with the song and the kapow, bam. It's so fun. It feels like we're returning back, and again, it just feels so great to have this back. We even get a nice little Easter egg to, how Catwoman was played by 3 different actors. I love that bit. It really just shows us how tongue-in-cheek and how it was really willing to reference its own self. But of course, as always, the Batman and Robin knock out all the henchmen, who of course are dressed up like their most popular costume was on the show. I like the little reference there. But as usual, the villains quickly make their escape, and then Batman and Robin get in the Batmobile and chase the Joker in the Joker-mobile. It's a nice fun, but of course the villains quickly get away, but they leave behind a clue, a bunch of alfoil. Batman takes it back to the Batcave and analyzes it, and finds out it's gravy. And their logical conclusion? They're hiding out at an old TV dinner factory. We then cut back to the villains who are trying to figure out, their big plan to what to do with the ray, but Catwoman is coming up with an idea to turn Batman evil. And I like how everyone says it's been tried and done before. Again, nice little reference that many people in the show have done that, especially Catwoman on several occasions. But she plans to drug him and says that this time it will work. But, as always, Batman and Robin end up crashing in on the party and end up getting to a fight with the three male villains. But of course, they end up getting knocked out unconscious and tied, put on a conveyor belt, which whilst also being on top of an actual TV dinner, sent into a giant oven. Catwoman once again tries to turn Batman into evil, but it doesn't work. And of course, the villains quickly make their leave. Just as that's happening, the TV tray is making its way closer and closer to the oven, but Batman, being Batman, manages to get their way out. And again, it's a nice, and I like how it reminds you of a cliffhanger, with the traditional death traps, something I really liked. Eventually, we go back to Wayne Manor where Alfred and Harriet is about to enter Bruce Wayne's study, but Bruce stops her before she touches the Shakespeare head bust. He then calls in Alfred and telling him of what's happened, and promptly fires him. So this is something shocking and almost completely out of character. Even I like how Dick says, "How can you do this? This guy has been almost a father to you since you were a kid." But I like how he said. But again, this is something that's more in line with the more modern Batman, with being more stern and hardy, and a little bit of lightheartedness is not really present for this scene. Something I find very intriguing, and ironically, rather than being out of character, actually plays into the plot in the long run, and we'll get to that. Eventually, we cut to montages of Batman and Robin essentially looking through the entire city trying to find the villains, but can't. We can't, and even go to Commissioner Gordon and Chief O'Hara to essentially update them on their progress. Realizing they are nowhere in Gotham City, Batman jumps to the logical conclusion that they must be in space. Realizing the villains will go up there, they quickly get into essentially the Bat Rocket, a giant actual spaceship, to go up into space to a nearby space station up there where the villains currently are. Whilst up there, Joker, Riddler, and the Penguin begin a mutiny to get rid of Catwoman, not trusting her and saying how she would, it's clear that they hint that every villain knows that Catwoman has a thing for Batman, and don't trust that she will, won't sell them out. Something a nice little coherent continuity with the original series. As they essentially are trying to throw her out an airlock, Batman and Robin happen to come in just in time and save her. And here we get a nice, interesting fight scene. As they make their way to the center bit of the space station, Batman's attitude has really changed to be something more dark and grisly. We get this nice little fun, gravity fight in the air, which is all fun, but eventually everyone's forced back down to ground, or Earth, ground, I should say. And this results in a brutal fight with Batman making constant references to Michael Keaton's Batman, and even the Batman The Dark Knight Returns. Nice little fun Easter eggs there if you could really catch up on it. And essentially beats the three very brutally. And of course, Catwoman makes the opportunity to make her escape. But Robin is worried that Batman's not acting like Batman. Eventually, all three villains of the Caped Crusaders managed to make their way back down to Earth and get the duplicated ray back to Gordon. It was revealed that the villain's plan was to duplicate into 3 Earths, where each villain will have their own Earth to rule. Again, very out there plot, and I would say probably the most biggest plot that these villains would ever consider pulling off. But Batman's acting more like the more chronological Batman. He disappeared without everyone noticing he left the room, and even leaves Robin at the mansion at the police station by himself. Batman managed to make his way back to Wayne Manor, and he's Bruce watching the show, but his attitude is really changing. He starts to lash out a bit at Aunt Harriet, and even kicks Dick out of the mansion. Just as this is happening, crime has risen to an all-time high, but Batman is refusing to come and help. Eventually, Batman's had enough and comes into Gordon and basically flat out tells how the hell did these two ever become, police officers. I love that line because it's always a question we fans were wondering, as usually Gordon and O'Hara were portrayed as being, well, idiot. What's happened? But now Batman's gone full evil. He's got the duplicator ray and it's duplicated several Batman and essentially takes over the city, both in certain high official places such as law enforcement and the mayor's office, but basically turns the city into his own craziness. We also get scenes of this old man going around, which happens to be Alfred, going around and collecting certain items on the street. We also find that Dick has moved into an apartment and is wondering how Batman's attitude has changed. He then comes to the conclusion it has to do with the catnip Catwoman gave him, only it's working very slowly. Now he's become this monstrous villain, realizing the only way to snap him out of it is to go to Catwoman and ask and force the antidote. He then goes to Catwoman's nightclub, a nice little reference to Catwoman's first episodes in season 2, and essentially has a nice confrontation with Catwoman and demands, if this can be reversed, and she says yes and agrees to team up with her to get Batman back to normal. They then drive in the Catwoman's Catmobile, or cat car, kitty car, whatever they called it on the show, and drive all the way back to the Batcave, although Catwoman is knocked out unconscious, and there's a few nice little innuendos which I absolutely, got a little chuckle out of. Eventually, Robin and Catwoman end up back at the Batcave and end up in a confrontation with Batman. Finding out that the antidote won't work because Batman has taken some kind of precaution to make sure the antidote, won't reverse his condition. We end up getting into a Batman and Robin standoff, but not a fight. It's a utility belt standoff, using all the gadgets, a nice little tongue-in-cheek to how Batman and Robin had these bizarre gadgets throughout the show. This eventually leads into, Robin and Catwoman being subdued and tied up and about to be lowered into the Batmobile's nuclear power source and essentially to be fried. Batman then leaves in classic villain fashion to see them die. As they are lowering into it, Robin manages to get out courtesy of a bat gadget that he used to save him and Catwoman. But realizing that they really need to find a way to snap Batman out of it and need to take down every major Batman, because Batman has now created an army of literally himself, they realize that no one will be crazy enough to go up against him. But Robin says this line that made me smile. You're wrong. There's a whole prison full of them. And immediately, Catwoman and Robin concoct a scheme and successfully get all the supervillains out of the prison. And it's a who's who of fan favorites, from King Tut to Egghead, Mr. Freeze, the Mad Hatter, the Bookworm, Falseface. Archer, the Minstrel, Clock King, Sandman, so on and so forth. A lot of fan favorites. So I like that little reference here. Eventually, we find Batman at the Gotham Palace, where he's taken over the studio, and essentially created. And because he's, basically this ego showman now by this point, has turned all the satellites to become bombs. So if anyone turns off the TV or changes the channel, the satellite, the system will go boom, essentially causing mass explosions in Gotham. Just as that happened, Catwoman and Robin show up, prepared to have a showdown with Batman and all his men. But just while that's happening, he says, and how do you plan to do that? And they said, a little help from our friends. And out of the shadows come all the major big rogues. I was smiling. Eventually, there's a bat fight, and it's nice and fun to have all these villains, try and take down an army of Batman, but of course are subdued. However, Robin manages to successfully turn off the device to prevent any bombs from going off. Just as that's happening, all the Batman take all the Gotham villains back to the penitentiary. But Batman plans to both personally kill Robin and Catwoman with his own bare hands. But just as he's about to, a person comes in and gives Batman a bottle of, I guess, wine or some kind of drink, saying how he's the city's new biggest pop star. He then drinks it, and of course is about to go and kill Catwoman and Robin. But this somehow manages to have the antidote that Robin and Catwoman gave him early in the movie kick in, and he's returned back to normal. But there's a problem. He's turned back to normal. The other Batman haven't. And just when there's about to be a bat fight between Batman, Robin, and Catwoman amongst all the Batman, they suddenly start turning into dust. I like that because it's a nice little reference to the movie, to what happened, to those people when they got dehydrated. Eventually, Gordon, Chief O'Hara, and all the policemen come barging in, and essentially everything's returned back to normal. And what I love about this scene, just as Batman is thanking Catwoman for her help, we get this nice little kiss. And I loved it. It was a long overwaited, something we fans have been waiting for Adam West's Batman and Julie Newmar to have their kiss. Of course, this is done in animation form, but hey, I'll take whatever we could get. But just as that's happening, it's also revealed that the person that gave Batman the drink was Alfred. Turns out that this was a precaution because Batman said the only way that this could have happened, where he could fire Alfred, is if he was some kind of under spell, and they have such a strong bond that no way he would fire him. And when Batman says he was one step ahead, we then realize that the Riddler, Penguin, and Joker had this emotion. They knew the device was unstable, and no way a duplicate could be on purpose. And we even know for a fact that when the prison break happened, Penguin, Riddler, and Joker were left in the prison, but for some reason turned to dust. So a little bit of foreshadowing to this scene. Batman then realized that this whole thing was a setup, a big ploy for Riddler, Penguin, and Joker to go on a mass crime spree and basically rob the city for their own ends. Realizing that, of course, that the villains they put in prison were basically duplicates, doppelgangers, they realized that they have to stop Joker, Penguin, and Riddler. But Catwoman wants to tag along for the ride, considering that they tried to kill her. As a result, as Batman, Robin, and Catwoman are about to take down the three big bads, they manage to make their escape by stealing all their items and get into a massive blimp. Eventually, Batman, Robin, and Catwoman end up following them on their Batwhirlies, which was something that were big in the comics, so I like how they're adapting that, and would fit well in this time period. Eventually, they manage to stop the blimp from going any faster, and essentially the villains and their henchmen get on top of the blimp, along with Batman, Robin, and Catwoman, and a nice bat fight happens. And basically, it's nice, fun, and cheek, with the usual Robin getting into peril, but instead of Batman saving him, Catwoman saves him. A nice little fun moment there. Eventually, once all the henchmen are taken down, they then take down all the main villains, with first Riddler, then Penguin, and then Joker, who ends up in a circus and is eventually taken away by a bunch of circus cops. I absolutely love that. Realizing all the villains are taken care of, Catwoman tries to escape with all their loot, and of course we get the usual scene that we saw in Season 2 constantly, with Catwoman trying to get Batman to come over to his side. Realizing that of course there's no way it's going to happen, she then essentially does the classic fall to her supposed death, and we get this night, and we get an emotional scene with Batman crying. We end the episode with Batman and Robin, well, Bruce Wayne and Dick, I should say, at a party they are hosting for Aunt Harriet. And again, it was teasing throughout the whole movie that Aunt Harriet knew a secret. Whether it was that they were gay or they were the Batman and Robin, it's hard to tell. But they managed to convince that the secret was actually a party, or birthday party, for Aunt Harriet. Or kind of party, anyway. But as usual, they see the bat signal in the sky and rush off. And here we end this episode in a nice, fun-filled way. And it's absolutely fun as I'm watching the credits. And this arguably brought a big smile to my face. The cast for this, of course, is the previously said, with Adam West and Burt Ward reprising their roles from the original series. Again, although I thought Adam West's voice was a bit aged, I could really tell he was putting a lot of effort in to recapture everything from the original. But I felt like with Burt Ward, his voice hasn't changed a bit. We also get Julie Newmar again back as Catwoman, but I like how this little scene that you're seeing right here, we get to see a reference and Easter eggs to the Eartha Kitt Catwoman and the Lee Merriweather Catwoman. A nice little reference to the series. We get Commissioner Gordon here, portrayed by Jim Ward, who, and honestly, he looks more of a bit of a modern comic, modern Commissioner Gordon, rather than the Neil Hamilton version that we got in the original series. But hey, it's nice and fun. We also get Chief O'Hara here, whose name is revealed to be Miles O'Hara, which I liked. He also happens to voice Warden Crichton, who gets a little appearance in the movie. We also here have Alfred in the movie, portrayed by Steven Weber. And again, he's pretty much, I like how these three, they don't really try to be like imitators of the original show, but instead try to do their own thing. We also get Aunt Harriet, of course, portrayed by Leanne Murray Stewart, and honestly, she's fun as ever, and I really feel that she really brings her own to the role, but at the same time, has a bit of a spark that reminded me so much of the original Aunt Harriet in the movie, in the series and movie, but here she manages to also bring her own thing to the role, which I really like. Of course, our main three villains include the Joker, portrayed by Jeff Bergman, William Sellers as Penguin, and Wally Wiggett as Riddler. Now, Joker and Riddler, their voice sounds like exactly from the original series, and I really like that they were really trying to bring that to life. I thought their voice acting was really well. Hell, the guy that did Riddler, if I recall correctly, actually voiced the Riddler in the Batman Arkham games. However, I can't say the same for Penguin. But then again, Penguin's voice was unique because of Burgess Meredith's was constant smoking, and I don't think we should jeopardize anyone's health just to be authentically accurate. But despite that, he still does a really good performance, and really does manage to feel like, he's living up to the legacy of it. But my favorite bit was when we got all the villains. Most of the fan favorites are here. These included guys like Clock King, Falseface, the Mad Hatter, King Tut, the Minstrel, Louis the Lilac, Black Widow, Mr. Freeze, Bookworm, Egghead, Siren, Shame, Sandman, and the Archer. I like how it was like a nice little Easter egg for the fans. Interesting fact, Mr. Freeze actually looks like a combination of Otto Preminger and Eli Wallach. And I like that they did that, because honestly Mr. Freeze had so many incarnations. 3 on the series, so I like that they did that. And honestly, it feels, even though that they design for the characters are drastically altered slightly, it still, you can definitely still tell who they are. I also like that it's a nice little Easter egg for the fans, and honestly, that's the really real way to describe this film. Easter eggs for the fans. Batman Return of the Caped Crusader, for me, is an absolute delight, and if you're a fan of the 60s show, you need to watch this. It was a nice little tongue-in-cheek, and honestly, a complete homage to the series. It was in many ways was a true love letter. It stayed true to the original format, but at the same time it went something, but it also did something different. It stayed true to an episodic format, but also brought something different in. The idea of Batman being a villain is very fun. And interesting. There's a ton of cheap references and Easter eggs, not just the original series, but Batman in general. I like how the design of the show is still kept in the 60s. Again, this was a love letter. The voice acting is great, and It's campy, cheesy, and silly. If you're a fan of the original show, you'll get a blast out of this movie. I certainly did, and I find that it is absolutely fantastic. It is worth watching, and it absolutely lived up to the legacy that the show left behind. There we have it. That was Batman Return of the Caped Crusaders. A nice little love letter to the original series, and in many ways a continuation. If you haven't seen it, give it a watch. I can't recommend it enough. Now, after the massive success of this movie, a sequel was announced, and the sequel in question would be something very special, which I will review some point this year. So until then, this has been the Steven Hour. Ladies and gentlemen, so long for now.